In the village of Vyskapelia, on the 1st of June, Serhiy and Svetlana Lanovich were shot and killed in their homes. This is the anatomy of a suspected war crime. Most afternoons, Valentina visits the graveyard close to her home in Vyskapelia. The village was liberated in September. But Valentina is not free of the barbarity her family experienced under Russian occupation. These are the graves of her daughter Svetlana and her husband Serhiy, shot dead in their own home. And this is the story of just one of thousands of suspected war crimes committed in Ukraine this year. But this one was designed to cover up another. Valentina still lives opposite where her daughter and son-in-law used to call home.
Вона була доброю людиною. Що Сережа такий поклав. Сережа із двох вони такі, де яке горе, чи де що-небудь знайомих, вони завжди.
Serhiy was a retired police officer but worked part-time in social care in the village. Svetlana ran the pharmacy here. After the Russians took Vyskapelia, the couple used to risk their lives by cycling along this path to a neighboring liberated village, Zelenodolsk. It was here, back in June, where we first heard about their story.
They came here for medicine, for food products, not only for their family, but for everybody on their street in Vyskapelia village.
The journey home and back into occupation was about 10 miles. Again and again, Svetlana and Serhiy ran the gauntlet of Russian checkpoint guards. Why? To bring medicine back to the sick and elderly of their village. This was Svetlana and Serhiy's house. Russian soldiers were regular visitors here. They looted the couple's valuables, would sit in their garden drinking. But then, according to her family, one night at the end of May, one of the soldiers raped Svetlana. After the rape, the couple decided to complain to the Russian commander in the village. We don't know why they decided to do this. Perhaps some sort of residual faith in institutions, even occupying ones. But friends of the rapist got wind of the fact that the couple had complained. At around 7 o'clock in the morning on the 1st of June, 2 Russian soldiers showed up to the crossroads here, just outside the village. They were shouting, they were shooting in the air. One of them separated, and then neighbors could hear him shout,
"Это здесь, я ее нашел."
Yulia, who lives opposite, witnessed what happened next.
Я почула, як він каже: "Молись, ставай на коліні, признавайся." А вона кричить: "Я нічого не бачила, я нічого не бачила." Оце їй були слова. Все. Потім були вистріли опять.
They shot Serhiy first, then they shot Svetlana.
Вона вскрикнула, після того якась опять розмова була, і ще були вистріли. І після того все затихло, просто все затихло.
Svetlana's mother heard the shots, was one of the first on the scene once the soldiers had left.
Як вискочили, біжу, кричу: "Доця, доця", як я добігла сюди, як побачила залито кров, я поняла, що вони вбиті вже все.
Standing on the spot where her daughter was killed, Valentina remembers that there were roses on the ground by the body. It appeared her daughter was picking them just before they shot her.
Де їй були цвіти, вона лежала, і тут де їй були рози. Вона, отак вона ж впала сюди.
Sometime later, a Russian commander told Valentina that the soldiers involved had been shot. We have no way of verifying this. Ukrainian prosecutors are investigating what happened here. Different people will have different memories of Svetlana and Serhiy. Valentina will have some of the most vivid ones. Others, who they helped, may travel along this road, and remember the husband and wife on their bicycles with their bags full of medicine. Cycling back home again, in tandem, side by side.
Porrick O'Brien reporting. Well, joining me now is Nigel Pavoas, a British prosecutor who leads an international team investigating alleged war crimes in Ukraine. And you have just come back from exactly that village.
Yes, it was a week ago. I was in Vyskapilia and neighbouring villages in the Kherson region.
And what were you doing there?
Well, we were part of a mobile justice team, both Ukrainian and international, going down to the newly liberated areas to investigate and scope the amount of sexual violence that's taken place there. So one of my questions was going to be, this is one story, one terrible story, but how likely is it to be common in Ukraine? Well, unfortunately, we're obviously seeing more and more of these types of crimes, and if it's possible, even worse than this type of crime. And it's taking place across the newly liberated territories, as indeed it took place back in March in the Kiev region when that was occupied by Russian troops. I mean, what are people telling you on the ground? Because we know in other conflicts across the world, rape has been used in a terrible way as a strategic weapon, if you like. Is there evidence, do you think, from what you are seeing, what you are hearing, that that is happening in Ukraine? Well, what I can say is there is a strong pattern emerging of sexual violence across the entirety of occupied Ukraine. So it does start to suggest that. Obviously, as investigators and prosecutors, we have to keep an open mind. But certainly, the degree and the spread of crimes we're seeing does start to suggest that, yes. Now, we know that this incident, you can't talk about it specifically, but Ukrainian prosecutors are looking at it to see whether it is evidence of a war crime. Of course, yeah. I mean, explain to us how you delineate a normal, terrible crime and something that could constitute a war crime in these instances. Well, if it's a soldier acting in an international armed conflict, then obviously they're not allowed to use sexual violence as people aren't in normal times. And it sounds like this is evidence of an execution as well, and obviously that is illegal, whether in wartime or not. So, on the face of it, this is at least a direct perpetrator war crime. I mean, the Russians obviously continue to deny that they're targeting civilians. They continue to deny that they are not perpetrating war crimes. What do the prosecutors have to do to prove this and to see whether they, in the end, can get prosecutions? Well, it's not just sexual violence, but obviously we're seeing the widespread missile attacks and Iranian drone attacks across Ukraine on civilian infrastructure. And even in Kiev, there was an attack on a playground and a tourist bridge. So on the face of it, there does seem to be a pattern of targeting just civilian infrastructure. And the civilian population is hugely dependent, obviously, on power, on water, on heating. And that seems to be being cynically targeted across Ukraine as we... You've seen that happen as you've been going for months now. I've been extremely close to the explosions in Kiev and actually in the south when they have struck that civilian infrastructure, and it's shaken the place where I've been. It's literally shaken the roof off it. And when Vladimir Putin is using phrases like retaliation to justify these type of attacks, he really is getting close to admitting that these are illegal attacks authorised by him. Now, there are Ukrainian prosecutors, and then there are external teams like yourself. But I suppose many people ask, though, where does this go in the end? Well, it's a good question. Certainly, Ukraine has primary jurisdiction over the crimes taking place on its territory. There will be prosecutions there, and we are working very hard to make sure there are high-level prosecutions in Ukraine. But, of course, we're also building large cases to help the International Criminal Court and cooperate with them, but also in the hope that one day there'll be an international tribunal where some of these big cases can be tried. I mean, how confident are you that that will happen? It's political, I think, as you know, the political will to actually set up that tribunal. But if it is, there's likely to be strong evidence of widespread atrocity crimes. And just in terms of a personal note, as I say, you have been travelling back and forth consistently. You're seeing the devastation and it's getting much worse. It's becoming very difficult to live. There's obviously darkness in the streets now with the lack of electricity. There'll be a heating problem in the winter. There will be a big humanitarian problem, I think, over the winter with normal civilians in Ukraine. And it's really starting to feel quite scary, quite terrifying, I think, for civilians. And it's going to be a very long, hard winter, especially if these attacks continue.